This is a sermon about Eves. No, not the capital E, Eve, not the one from the opening chapters of Genesis, though it would be appropriate to start with her at the beginning, since that Eve's story and certain interpretations about what happened in the garden indelibly shaped how women are perceived in the world. But this is a sermon about Eves like Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, as in the eve of something new, the time before. Today is the eve of the 50th anniversary of the ordination of 11 women to the priesthood in the Episcopal Church. It happened at Church of the Advocate in Philadelphia in late July 1974. And I really hope you'll come tonight to watch the documentary of this first and irregular and historic event that changed so much of what we know about church. That story is full and beautiful and complex and definitely worth your while, and I'm not going to tell it to you right now. Tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of that event, which means that 50 years ago today, 11 women were getting ready for something that they had already spent years getting ready for. And not just those 11 women, but 3 retired bishops, and of course, altar guilds, and acolytes, and organists, and as it turned out, about 2,000 people who would attend, mostly as supporters, with some coming to protest. All of these people knew it was the eve of something. They were anticipating this moment, hopeful and nervous. They were as ready as they could be. Sometimes we know it's the eve of. We circle a date on the calendar and we put all our energy toward preparing for that day. Buying school supplies before the first day of school, prepping meals for a holiday, sending out invitations for a party, packing for a trip. But this also has to be a sermon about not knowing when you're at an eve. Because sometimes we're at the brink of something new and we have no idea. Like Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women. They were prepared, but for an ending. They brought the spices to the tomb to finish a story. And instead, these 3 named women, and some other women too, found themselves standing right at the edge of something completely transformative. They didn't know that their grieving walk to the tomb at early dawn was Easter Eve. But these women were the first ones to learn that resurrection was real and true, and they became the first ones to preach the good news. They carried the news of a new world back to the others who were still living in the old world of before, still living in the world of violence and death and endings. And the women told them this dazzling news. And it seemed impossible, an unbelievable idle tale. It all seemed impossible to everyone who was still standing in the eve, on the before side of this momentous, magnificent change. As if the women were building a bridge even as they walked, transporting themselves and anyone who would listen from one world of before into another new world of after. In some ways, it might have been like that for Shiphrah and Puah too. Midwives always prepared to stand at a threshold between before and after. Midwives who knew without ultrasounds that a birthday eve can surprise you, that you don't always know that the day before everything changes is the day before everything changes. And could these women, with their learned wisdom about bodies and power, know that they were ushering in a revolution? Always prepared for birth and new life and its intrinsic risks, Shiphrah and Puah were prepared to thwart a death-dealing king. And they used their place inside the chaos and unpredictability of birth to deliver hope and possibility to a people beaten down by fear. Because they did invisible work, they were positioned to bridge the gap between oppression and freedom, between death and life. So let's be clear. This is a sermon about women. This is a sermon about women because women have always been in the story. Sometimes we know their names, and sometimes we don't. But there are not stories without women. Women are in every room, whether they're seated at the table or serving the table. Women have been present, seen, and unseen since Eve, feeding people, whispering wisdom, preaching good news or saying no to tyrants, leading the army or tending the wounded. Often, women are there in the particularly messy and pivotal transitional moments, precisely because women's work has always also been the messy work of birth and death, delivering babies and washing bodies. Women were, and often still are, given these dirty jobs. But these unclean tasks are holy because they happen at the very edges of life itself. The Eve moments are the front line where the holy breaks in. And so then, let's be abundantly clear that this is a sermon about God. Our God is a God who lives and moves in the moments that are hard and heartbreaking and holy. God is intimately and deliberately involved in the moments of Eve, in the mess of ushering us forward over and over and over again from what is to what could be. God doesn't only work at the cusp of time, but God sure does seem to have a predilection, maybe even a preference for eaves, for precipices, for moments when it's hard for us to see what's next. Eves are places of what if. And what if things turned out beautifully, surprisingly, even miraculously better than we could hope for? Certainly, God is constantly imagining life for us that is beyond our feeble imaginations. When we are stuck in the place of before, believing that what is all there is, when we are inside the mess and can only see things collapsing or breaking or falling apart, God is at work in the potential of that chaos and disorder, because the spaces between before and after is where all the possibility lives. And since the very, very beginning, the creative force of God has been at work in possibility, in making the story bigger and wider and deeper and broader, showing us how far the horizon just might reach. No doubt it was messy when those 11 women got ordained. People were anxious and worried and thought the sky was falling. Even the ones who wanted this new thing to happen were likely afraid. Living at the edges is risky. Shiphrah and Puah must have worked with fear and trembling that they might be caught. They were caught, worrying and hoping all the while in equal measure about doing the right thing. And Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women were heartbroken and confused that early dawn, and then they were testifying to a ridiculous and audacious claim. Did you notice then how this sermon is about expanding possibility? At each of these junctures, the world gets bigger. At each brink, our imaginations are shown to be lacking compared with the ever-expanding imagination of God. The possibility of the promised land opening up to the Israelites was born into the hands of a midwife. The not-so-idle tale that would change the world was carried by a group of women with just enough faith in the promise of resurrection to say it out loud to a few friends. And 11 women and 3 old bishops propped open one more small door to the wisdom and leadership of the other half of humankind, bringing perspectives and stories and understandings that were always there but had gone unheard for too long. At each moment when the world appeared to be fixed, shrinking, or even ending, these women found themselves peering over the rim into a bigger, wider, deeper, broader world. Because the worlds that God dreams for us are worlds where our boundaries are just that, our own invented barriers. So you know, right, that this is a sermon about all of us. This is a sermon about learning from women who stood at the edge of before and after and who found God there. This is a sermon about history. And this is a sermon about the future. Because this is a sermon about the eve of something. And who knows what it is the eve of? We all find ourselves at eves. And sometimes we know it, and sometimes we don't. At uncertain moments where everything from before falls away, but then in the aftermath, we can suddenly see amazing and surprising new vistas. These are the eves in which we can discover that God is real and true and holding the door open wide for us, ushering us, delivering us into an impossible future.